Well, far from the forgotten conventions of staying out of other countries' politics, President Trump stormed into the UK's 2019 election campaign today, declaring Jeremy Corbyn would be so bad for the country and urging Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson to get together as an unstoppable force. He also criticised Mr Johnson's Brexit deal, though, suggesting the US couldn't make a trade agreement with the UK. All this on the very day Britain was supposed to be coming out of the EU. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me.
Well, the day starts fairly conventionally for an election. You see the two party leaders going out on the stump, trying to put out their core messages. Jeremy Corbyn saying this manifesto this time is going to be even more radical than his last one. Boris Johnson saying Parliament had stymied him and was holding back all the nice things he really wanted to do if only he could get Brexit done. And then you have the American president doing almost from a copybook what a foreign leader is not meant to do, and wading in, jumping into the British general election, rubbishing Jeremy Corbyn, praising Boris Johnson, but really interestingly suggesting to Nigel Farage, who's sitting at the other end hosting his phone-in with this man dialing in from Washington, telling him that he should be doing a deal with Boris Johnson. Now, the Brexit Party is the dog that hasn't barked in this election so far. Will they throw themselves completely into this election campaign, fight every single seat as Nigel Farage originally promised, or do something a lot less than that? We're promised an announcement tomorrow on that, but this is how the day that Brexit was meant to happen actually went.
October the 31st.
Today, the date with destiny. He promised, others echoed.
I remember it. Mark, he said, look, we've got to leave on the 31st of October, otherwise everyone in this room is out of a job, including you and including me.
We will come out of the EU on October the 31st.
Basically, we are mummifying a pumpkin.
Instead of celebrating Brexit, Boris Johnson was watching a Halloween crafts session in Suffolk and blaming Labour for his broken promise.
You said we'd leave the EU tonight. We won't. So why should anyone trust anything else you say during this campaign?
Well, of course, I'm incredibly frustrated that we're not able to get Brexit done today. But let's be in no doubt what's happened. We had a fantastic deal on the table. The House of Commons voted it through, but then they voted again for delay. Stick it in the water.
And then lift it.
This at another campaign stop at Cambridgeshire Hospital. Questions about Brexit. His photo ops proclaiming the issues he wants voters to think a government can move on to once Brexit is done.
Give it a squeeze.
Jeremy Corbyn paraded his shadow cabinet team in South London. He said Boris Johnson's plans for a US-UK trade deal after Brexit would harm the NHS.
We will stop them. Labour won't let Donald Trump get his hands on our National Health Service. It's not for sale.
Jeremy Corbyn joined in a chant, which you'll probably hear again. And he rolled out another central message of the campaign. He would fight for the people against the establishment.
The Prime Minister wants you to believe that we're having this election because Brexit is being blocked by an establishment elite. He's a man of much imagination. People aren't fooled so easily. They know the Conservatives are the establishment elite.
Well, he's privately educated as well, as far as I know. This is not about where you come from or what your background is. This is about your vision for the country.
The Lib Dems paraded their campaign slogan on a van that then toured the constituencies of Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn before coming back to a small but hostile crowd of Leave demonstrators. The Lib Dems' opponents are promising the first stage of Brexit could be settled one way or another within months or weeks, depending who you vote for.
We've got an oven-ready deal. Put it in the microwave as soon as we get back after the election on Friday, on the 12th of December. Get it done, and then let's get on with our domestic agenda.
Labour will get Brexit sorted within 6 months. We'll let the people decide whether to leave on a sensible deal or remain. It really isn't that complicated.
Tonight, an extraordinary intervention by President Trump in the general election. Donald Trump dialed into Nigel Farage's phone-in programme and broke all convention, wading into the contest here.
Including Boris, he's a fantastic man, and I think he's the exact right guy for the times. And I know that you and him will end up doing something that could be terrific. If you and he get together, it's unstoppable force. And Corbyn would be so bad for your country. He'd be so bad. He'd take you in such a bad way. He'd take you into such bad places.
Pressure on Nigel Farage as he weighs up whether to stand his Brexit Party candidates in every seat in the country, as he promised only a few weeks ago. An announcement is due tomorrow. We asked two veterans of the Commons what they make of it so far. Ken Clarke, an independent Conservative with the whip removed, retiring after 49 years in the Commons, and former Tory leader and Brexit supporter Ian Duncan Smith. If you were a young man now, would you join the Conservative Party?
Not at this moment, no. I have to say candidly, I don't think I would.
Who would you be voting for in the general election?
I've voted Conservative every election in my life.
Wasn't quite my...
No, well, I think I once previously sort of rather recklessly in public said, am I going to be tempted to cast an Orpington-type protest vote, which, fortunately, only people my age know what I'm talking about. Getting back to the
Lib Dem by-election triumph. Have we got a clue there?
The first by-election triumph of modern politics.
In the privacy of the polling station, it might be Lib Dem.
I think 40-odd% of the public have not voted for the same party in the three elections. It depends what sort of campaign the party run. If we really do make ourselves the Brexit party under our brand, my loyalty is going to be strained absolutely to the utmost. I'm not voting for some crazy right-wing nationalist organisation calling itself a Conservative government.
Here's Ken Clarke sitting next to you saying he struggles with the idea of saying he will vote Conservative and he wouldn't join it as a young man. Doesn't that worry you?
Well, I think it just says how dominant this issue of Brexit has become in everybody's minds, and as far as it dominates Ken's and mine. The point I make, though, is it is an issue we have to settle because we have to get to the other issues, which for everybody's lives are probably far, far more important.
They didn't get the Brexit they were promised for Halloween, but where their support goes now is one story in the 6-week contest now beginning.
So with Labour declaring it will protect the NHS against any potential sell-off after Brexit, and Boris Johnson photographed at a succession of hospitals, the health service looks like being at the forefront of this election. But is it an issue the Conservatives can win on? Our health and social care correspondent, Victoria McDonald, is with me.
Yes, well, we have seen Boris Johnson at a lot of hospitals today. We even saw him wearing a white coat. Maybe he wants to be a doctor in his next life, and goodness knows there are enough vacancies. And therein lies one of the problems for the Conservatives. But the first and most important problem for them is that it's a winter election. And winter is always a difficult time for the NHS. This year predicted that it's going to be that there is a crisis looming. There are severe staff shortages. There are bed shortages. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine has said they need to open another 4,000 beds just to get through this winter. There are problems with drug shortages, you name it. Now, the Conservatives will say that they put in more money. They will also say that they've put in more money into the building programme, into the capital programme, although they're exaggerating slightly how much they're going to use for that. Labour is going to make hay with this. It's always easier for the Labour Party. They see the NHS as their own. And right out of the box, Jeremy Corbyn was there yesterday talking about the NHS, and again today, talking about the spectre of privatisation. Also talking about that Channel 4 dispatches in which it was claimed that there had been secret talks about drug pricing as part of a trade deal with America, which a lot of people are very concerned about should that happen. The fact is that the NHS always plays out very large in the polling. The public really care about the NHS. It's always high up there, although at the moment it's just below Brexit. What we can guarantee is that there will be politicians walking down those corridors, their sleeves rolled up, washing their hands, their ties tucked in, hoping to make the NHS, to claim that the NHS is safe in their hands.
Victoria, thank you. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, Dr. Dan Poulter from the Conservatives, and Sarah Wollaston, also a doctor, from the Liberal Democrats now. And I began by asking Jonathan Ashworth whether Labour would spend more than the Conservatives, given the Tories' pledge to build 40 hospitals.
I believe that when you see the manifestos that a Labour government...
You don't know yet.
Well, we don't know what the Tory manifesto is, but...
Well, it's a simple thing. When we're on the doorstep, I say, who's going to spend more on the NHS, you or them?
I think the Labour Party will be spending more on the NHS and associated health services like public health, and of course the social care services as well, than the Tory Party.
Dan Poulter, he says it's 6 hospitals, not 40.
I think there's money there immediately for building 6 new hospitals, and there are plans in the pipeline for 40 in the future. But significantly, there is...
So it is only 6?
Well, it's 6 definitely happening right now, and the rest are planned for the future. And obviously, the detailed planning of that takes a little bit of time. There are those schemes that are shovel-ready, ready to go right here, right now. Going forwards, though, there is going to be money made available for the extra hospitals, the other 40 hospitals, to make sure it happens. And that's something obviously takes time to get the detailed planning consents in place.
Sarah Wollaston, are you a one-issue party going into
Not
this
at
election?
all.
It's just Brexit, or do you have a health
it's not. We're going to have a really comprehensive package, which is about health. It's going to be about well-being, keeping people well in the first place, and it's also going to be about social care and looking at that as a whole system. So we'll be making an announcement about our health policy shortly. Oh, I do know what it is, but I'm not going to be announcing it today. I think people will be really energised by it. But what I would also say, Brexit, you can't take Brexit out of this. There's no version of Brexit that's going to help the NHS, social care, or prevention and well-being. And I think it's a real shame that both these political parties are not being honest about how much money it takes out of our ability to actually spend on services, the things that really matter. So we should stop Brexit for that reason.
I mean, isn't the real problem, Jonathan Ashworth, for Labour, that you're going to spend the first year of government messing around with the Constitution, messing around with Brexit and Scotland and another referendum there? You're not going to have time to get legislation on the health service through, are you?
Well, we'll bring forward more funding into the NHS because there's been a decade of cuts to health services in this country. We'll bring back a training bursary so we can recruit 20,000 extra nurses for our NHS. But on the issue of Brexit, Brexit is a disaster for the National Health Service, but we don't think it's fair or democratic just to say we'll cancel Brexit. We want to put that decision back to the British people. So the only party offering people a referendum in this election is the Labour Party, and if people out there want to remain within the European Union, they need to vote Labour to get that referendum.
Well, they won't know what they're going to get. And what's more, Labour are going to be introducing a massive top-down reorganisation of the NHS, which the NHS itself has said it doesn't want. Seriously, it's set out what its proposals are to reduce unnecessary constant tendering, but it's not what Labour has put in.
Privatisation, haven't we?
But that's there. But that's there in the NHS's own plans.
So are you going to end the privatisation? That's crucial, because Jeremy Corbyn today said anybody providing NHS services should be an NHS employee. Now that means the end of all contracting out. All privatisation of the health service would stop under Labour government. Is that now your policy?
I mean, look, when you've got cleaning contracts in hospitals and you're going out to private sector organisations, because they're cutting corners, they're leaving sort of infectious waste flowing through children's wards. Or the problems we've had in hospital catering, because contracts have been outsourced and they've had to cut back.
What about medical services that are being done by private companies for NHS patients? Is that all going to end?
Well, we're going to end this privatisation.
Because the reason that happens is because the NHS doesn't have the capacity.
No.
So you'll increase waiting lists.
No, the reason that happens is because of the Lansley Act, the Tory Health and Social Care Act, impose a competitive tendering on the NHS, which forces many contracts to go out to the private sector.
Your health service has got a load of private companies getting rich, dealing with health service patients, rather than health service employees doing it for much lower rates.
I'm an NHS doctor. I don't do private work. I have an ambition to do private work. I want to work for the NHS. All of us, I think, here believe the NHS can deliver very high quality care and often better care in a more integrated and joined up way for patients. And I think there's an acknowledgement across all parties that we need to look at this and back what the NHS is saying, which is to move move towards a new tendering arrangements and reform the current arrangements to more strongly encourage and support NHS organisations to be able to deliver care.
There's a trust issue here again, isn't there? Because, you know, while you and your party have been constantly saying the NHS isn't on the table when it comes to an American trade deal, we know, because Channel 4's dispatches revealed, that talks have been going on with American pharma companies and American trade representatives about American drug pricing, because they want it on the table, because they think that we're not paying enough and they want us to pay more.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the Prime Minister's ruled that out, the Health Secretary's ruled that out.
If you say the NHS isn't on the table, the voters are liable to not believe you.
Well, I approach this as a doctor as well as an MP, and it's something that I would not or cannot support. We have that reassurance on the record from the Prime Minister, and I think we have to accept that it's not on the table, the NHS.
What I'd like to see is all political parties committing to listen to what the NHS itself says it needs from legislative reform, and to work alongside the people who work in the NHS, who lead it, and say, look, let's look at what they have proposed.
Do you recognise this is going to be a problem on the doorstep? You know, that any commitment you make is liable to be disbelieved at the moment because people just don't believe politicians and what they say.
And I don't blame them. I mean, Boris Johnson said we were going to leave the European Union today. He'd die in a ditch over it. We're still in the European Union.
Just finally, I mean, obviously you want this to be about anything but Brexit, really, as an election. But I mean, ultimately, if Brexit is your number one priority, stopping Brexit, you've got to vote Liberal Democrat, haven't you?
No.
Because they're the only party promising to stop it.
Well, you want to help the NHS,
but I think that's
you're not going to help the NHS
I want to
with
remain. I want to remain in the European Union, right? The great city I represent, Leicester, voted to remain. But I do think it's undemocratic to just say we'll cancel the vote of 17
It's
million
not
people.
anti-democratic.
You've got to give people a referendum.
Give
people a referendum.
From your point of view, Dan Poulter, when people say to you, you say we'll get Brexit done. I mean, you won't, in fact, will you?
Well, the first priority is to get through the withdrawal agreement, which other parties have prevented the Prime Minister from delivering. We then get Brexit done. We can then move on to talking about the NHS, investing in education, investing in our health service.
If you can get Brexit done, you can't.
But that's what this election is about. That's why the Prime Minister has gone to the polls.
Because you cannot finish the talks.
But there was a people's vote in 2016. This country voted to leave. I voted Remain, but I respect that result. That was the people's verdict. We need to now deliver on that, get Brexit done.
And you are still repeating this nonsense mantra of get Brexit done. Well, it's not true, is it? Because the talks go on.
Well, the talk we have the withdrawal agreement, so we get that bit done and get through that. And then in terms of what the final relationship looks like with Europe, of course there will be ongoing talks. But if we elect a Conservative government, we will uphold the referendum result and we will leave the European Union.
Dan Poulter, Sarah Wollaston, Jonathan Ashworth, thank you very much indeed. Well, later we'll be asking voters if this election is about Brexit or other issues like the NHS. For now, over to Matt in the studio.
Thanks, Chris. So, the ground war has begun in election 2019, but will the rules of engagement be fair? Twitter today has declared it'll ban political advertising from its platform, piling the pressure on Facebook to do the same, a move that its boss, Mark Zuckerberg, has resisted. Well, tonight, the Electoral Commission have told this programme they're disappointed and concerned that the UK's laws on digital campaigning haven't been updated, even though they made recommendations more than 2 years ago. Our political correspondent, Paul McNamara, reports.
The time for protest is over.
People have a chance to vote for real change.
Voters deserve better.
The starting gun's finally been fired, and the race will take 6 long weeks. Much of the campaigning in this election, though, will be done here. Millions of pounds will be spent beaming political messages direct to voters. It's a hugely influential digital battleground, but governed by rules designed for an analogue world.
It was all so much simpler a few years ago. Think of a message and pop it on a poster or a leaflet, as long as you include who's behind it. Online, well, last year, this pro-Brexit campaign group may have reached up to 10 million people. Who are they? Who's funding them? Well, nobody knows. Facebook say they've now changed their rules so that this sort of thing isn't possible. But that's not the case on all platforms. And just how are specific groups being targeted for these adverts? Well, thanks to this database, we now know what ads are being sent, but experts say there is still far too little information about why they're being sent to specific groups. And what about just plain old fact-checking? Remember this from the referendum? Well, experts say there is still very little to stop this sort of misinformation.
During the last election, 40% of all money spent by parties was spent online. The man in charge of the body that regulates elections, the Electoral Commission, expects it to be even more this time. In 2017, they made a number of recommendations, none of which have yet been changed.
It is the responsibility of parliaments to maintain our electoral law. It's not a vote-catching thing, it's just a responsibility to update and maintain. And we've had a succession of governments and parliaments going back a number of years who've not done that, not had the opportunity to do it, perhaps not had the will to do it. My call will be, the Commission's call will be in the next Parliament, that all the parties, in a cross-party way, join up, recognise it would be a really good thing to do to update our electoral law.
You've made your recommendation 2 years ago. Why are we still in this situation?
I'm not going to pretend the Commission is really disappointed and concerned. We are. We mustn't think that it undermines our rules, because we have a really good, strong democracy in the UK and really good elections. But it would be hugely helpful, it would hugely help public confidence, all our confidence, if the rules are updated.
Dabbling with democracy is an international business. Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee passed a report into Russian actions against the UK to Downing Street 2 weeks ago, and there's apparently a big section on elections.
Parliament and the public ought to have and must have access to this report in light of the forthcoming election, and it's really unacceptable for the Prime Minister to sit on it and deny them that information.
Downing Street say there is a process to go through before reports are released, which can take several weeks to accomplish. The threat, though, say experts, is real.
It's very difficult to stop foreign actors from engaging in online campaigning. When the rules were written, people imagined that in order to campaign, you need to be in the country. That's no longer the case, and therefore we don't have adequate rules to stop foreign interference.
And is that a genuine concern?
It is a concern. There have been concerns clearly about Russian interference at recent elections, but any international actor could get involved if they decided, and it would be very, very difficult on the current rules for us to know if that's happening.
The world of paid-for political campaigning can be murky, and it's a world Twitter has decided it wants no part of. Last night, its founder Jack Dorsey tweeted, "We've made the decision to stop all political advertising on Twitter globally. We believe political message reach should be earned, not bought." It's a ban which Facebook won't follow. Possibly not surprising, given that in the 2017 election, political parties spent £56,000 on Twitter, but £3.2 million on Facebook. Its founder Mark Zuckerberg today defended their policy of running ads that could spread false information and possibly steer elections. Industry watchers on the other side of the Atlantic question Mr. Zuckerberg's reasoning.
They've said that this is a free speech question, but at some point it's, how do you let politicians lie to everyone, especially when they're doing these micro-targeted ads, so maybe we don't even know what lies people are being fed. Facebook's very big and it is influential.
The EU referendum was largely fought online.
Roughly about 7 million people, 1.5 billion digital ads.
That's Dominic Cummings, the man behind the Leave campaign, who's now in Downing Street. But it took more than 2 years and a parliamentary inquiry to find out how the online battle for the referendum was fought. Now, once more, we are heading into a national vote being played on a digital pitch, being umpired by analogue laws.
Paul McNamara reporting. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Brett Bruin, who was Director of Global Engagement at the White House during President Obama's administration. And with me here in the studio, Carl Miller, co-founder of the Center for the Analysis of Social Media at the think tank Demos. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Carl. We heard Dominic Cummings there in Paul's report boasting about the fact that during the 2016 referendum campaign, they pumped out 1 billion ads to 7 million users in the last week of the campaign, and that made a huge difference, he thought, to the way the campaign went. Now, let's just look at some of them. Here's a famous one. Turkey is joining the EU. Good news, yes or no? Of course, this wasn't true, right? Nor was the next. Let's look at the next one. Okay, the EU blocks our ability to speak out and protect polar bears. Who would have known? And another one. Here we go. European Union wants to kill our copper. Now, it seems like a bad joke now, but these were very effective, weren't they? The question to you, Carl, is, has anything changed since 2016 to make that kind of stuff impossible?
No, not really, not under the law. I mean, the Electoral Commission has been very, very slow in trying to apply the same basic standards and principles which it enforces offline onto the online world as well. So, I mean, the bitter irony here is that the online world has become more and more important, and exactly at that moment, it's stayed a complete free-for-all.
So there must be some, and we've talked about this endlessly for the last few years, there must be some new regulation that has come into force that makes this more difficult to pump out.
There's very little. I mean, the Electoral Commission has tried to get the cooperation of the tech giants, and to be fair to them, they have tried to make political advertising more transparent. So Facebook now publicises political ads. They try and describe who's paid money for them, but it's still incredibly murky, very, very shadowy. We don't know what kind of ads are being sent to what people.
OK, let's go to Brett in Washington, D.C. Brett, we sent you those via email. You had a look at these ads as well. Presumably in the United States, where you also have an election coming up, well, not presumably, let me ask you the question. Is this kind of stuff more difficult to pump out? Are there more regulations in place now or not?
Not at all. In fact, we are in a situation right now where the tradecraft, the kind of techniques that Russia, others who've gotten in the game, like Iran, even China, they're far advanced from where they were in 2016 here in the US, and certainly during the Brexit campaign in the UK. Prior to that, it is worrying that not only government, but I have to say these tech companies, social media companies, have not done enough to, let alone deal with the problem, even try to track it, understand what's happening, where the ball is right now. So we're going into these elections flying largely blind.
And how is that possible, given all the adverse publicity that Mark Zuckerberg has received as a result of Cambridge Analytica?
Well, you look at what happened after the congressional testimony that Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey gave. There was no action taken by Congress. I've been asking the question here in Washington, who is in charge of disinformation in the U.S. government? And the answer that I've gotten is essentially no one. I think the same question could be asked in London. Who is the person that is in charge of defending British democracy from disinformation?
OK, well, you know, Carl Miller, who is in charge?
Well, no, my colleague here is completely right, and here's another bitter irony for you. I mean, these ads drive polarisation. They are part of the story of society splitting apart, and for that very reason, democracies are becoming more paralysed. We've had Brexit squatting our political landscape here in the UK now for so long, it's been so difficult to pass other laws through. So.
OK, but I mean, to be fair, of course, the other side, the Brexit side will say, well, hang on a minute, Remain put out all this Project Fear stuff. But the difference between the Project Fear ads, which were projections of what would happen to the economy if people voted to leave, which many of these things haven't happened yet, 3 years later, they may still happen, was that they weren't targeted specifically in the same way that a lot of the stuff that Dominic Cummings was putting out. Is that right?
No, I don't think the point here is to drive a kind of party political distinction between the character of different campaigns. Like, the real story and the most important thing for us to dwell on is this is changing the nature of elections and democracies. Suddenly, campaigns across the world can pump out tens of thousands of different stories about who they are and what they want to tens of thousands of different communities. That is so injurious. It breaks apart the common glue that we have, the common experience we have when we actually go into an election.
So how important is it that Dominic Cummings is now sitting in number 10 conducting this election campaign?
It's important that every single political party has all embraced this kind of targeted ads. You know, these are data-optimised, highly granular, targeted ads that we as independent researchers, journalists, we can't see. That's so difficult, I think, for us to then know, like, whether and in what ways campaigns are telling lies or different kinds of stories to different kinds of communities which other communities can't see.
Brett Bruin, Facebook reputedly knows us better than our own mothers do. If they are not reined in, if there's no regulation to stop them pumping out their stuff, and they've said they're not going to go along with what Twitter is doing, how much will they influence or allow others to influence this forthcoming election in the US?
Well, I fear considerably. And unfortunately, Facebook, in the 2018 elections, legislative elections here in the U.S., stood up a war room and then quickly stood it down. This is remarkable considering that much of the disinformation that is pushed out takes place not only before, during, and certainly after these elections. Because bear in mind that if you're Russia, China, Iran, what you're striving to do is to sow distrust, to generate division in the country, and that can easily be done before an election as it can be during the election.
Just to ask me, I'm going to ask you very briefly, why is Facebook resisting going down the Twitter road of banning these political ads? Is it because of money or because of their fundamental platform? Brett, quickly, why is Facebook resisting banning political ads in 10 seconds?
Well, I think quickly Zuckerberg has staked out a ground where he's saying, look, this is a question of freedom of speech, and we don't want to be the arbiters of it.
OK, nicely summed up. Brett Bruin, Carl Miller, thank you very much indeed.